When a loved one dies, society likes to tell us to give it time, like time alone will heal our pain. There's also this common theme that once we find closure to those traumatic events that disrupted our lives, that we're going to be able to find peace. A relationship ends, death or otherwise, and the solution is you need closure. But what if closure doesn't really exist? Today I'm going to talk about the idea of closure and how it impacts our ability to grieve. I'm Emily Graham, bereaved parent and grief coach at After Child Loss. If you've experienced child loss and are trying to survive grief and life after, start now by subscribing and clicking on the bell. My 7-year-old son died unexpectedly Christmas of 2015. His health rapidly declined over a period of 12 hours. He went from general stomach bug symptoms to full-on coma, one that he never woke from. His illness was a medical mystery. Lack of muscle function, weird behaviors, neurological symptoms, extreme fatigue. Every test that came back created more confusion, and the rate that he got worse only inspired concern. When my son died, we were told that we didn't need to have an autopsy, but we asked for one. We had to have answers. We needed to have that closure, right? We needed to know why, and we needed that closure. What I learned, though, was that there's no such thing as closure. Our autopsy took 7 months. There were a lot of dead ends. They were running tests. The answers that we got didn't quiet my questions. We discovered a rare hereditary blood disorder called porphyria. My husband and I were tested to confirm it, and then my daughters were both tested, and all 3 of them came back positive. When one of your children dies, you know that we fear that the same thing is going to happen again. That diagnosis fueled that fear for me. It seemed that the answers that I had about why my son died were now questions that were multiplying, right? There was no closure. Not only did I need to know more about porphyria, but I also needed to know that if we had known about the porphyria that night, could things have been handled differently, right, to create a different outcome? Now, I want to pause here because I think it's important to talk about the actual definition of grief. The one that you likely know is related to death, and grief is the normal, natural response to loss. But you know what else it is? It's also those conflicting feelings that are caused by a change or an end to a familiar pattern. Even more than that, grief is wishing for a different outcome. All of those things were happening for me. One of the first things I'm sure you noticed early on in your grief was the language that we use to describe it does not do it justice. So often our expectations of what it will be like don't align with the reality of how it actually feels. So the terminology we use, like the word closure, isn't accurate. Grief is typically thought of only as a response to death, but it's actually more than that. For bereaved parents, we grieve the loss of a relationship, of routine, of security, of part of our identity. You can't get closure for all of those things. When I got those autopsy results and then that diagnosis, then continued roadblocks by hospitals and doctors refusing to give me those additional answers that I needed, my grief was expanding. We continued our quest for answers because I had to have them. There was no moving past this until I found closure. We went so far as to hire an ER doctor outside of our hospital system, one that worked as a consultant and was a medical expert for legal teams. I needed closure that badly. On the positive side, he reviewed everything that happened that night. He told me areas that could have been handled differently. If we had known about the porphyria, he told me, whether that would have helped. He confirmed that every single thing that had happened, even if it was perfectly timed, the outcome would not have changed, right? My son deteriorated way too quickly. These were answers I desperately needed, but they were not closure. I've been able to educate myself on porphyria. I have an amazing pediatrician who is my right hand when it comes to advocating for my daughters and providing care. I have information about the disease that can at least help us to better manage it. We can, get all of those questions answered about that night, but I didn't get any closure, right? Nothing changed. That sense of peace that I should have gotten never came. That grief persisted. And so those answers were just answers to questions. I tell this story because I so often hear bereaved parents say, I need closure. They need answers to why, they need justice for their child's death. There's some elusive thing that they believe will provide the closure that they need in order to heal and move forward. Now, please know that these things do not provide some magical form of healing. They do not provide the foundation that you need. By all means, go after those answers. Go after that justice. Do whatever it takes for you, but don't expect that closure to change your grief. Grief recovery happens without closure. Closure means that something comes to an end. That grief and sadness that we feel, that will never go away. Closure doesn't make it easier to move on or even move forward. What it will do, though, is it'll keep you caught up in an ongoing search for something that doesn't exist. Grief is love, and I know you've heard that in so many versions. Our grief is simply our love for our child. So that love will never go away, so why would our grief go away simply by finding closure? The longer that you keep telling yourself that you need closure, the longer you go before you realize that you will always grieve. The longer you will go without realizing that grief and love and joy can and do coexist. Take your time to grieve. Build your support system. Find the answers you need. Do all of the things that you need to do to survive this loss. Just know, closure will not be your friend in this process. It's up to you to learn how to carry your grief, balance it with joy, and find ways to move forward. If you found this video at all helpful, please like, comment, share. Thank you.